Old Joel H.A. Riss had just put the mower away when his phone buzzed against his back pocket. He wiped his hands on his jeans and pulled it out, still smiling from the satisfaction of a clean-cut lawn. He figured it was Matt texting about the weekend barbecue plans, maybe confirming what time he and Caitlin would show up. The screen lit up with a preview from Caitlin. It read, "My son, DNA ancestry report," and there was an attached PDF file. The message above it said, "Baby, here is the official version you kept asking for. Four-way wrote it to your dad's side for his records." Joel Sta read at the screen. He read the words, "my son," again, and then he looked at the recipient field. She had sent it to him. Caitlin had meant to send this to someone else, probably the man she was calling baby on the side, and she had fat-fingered Joel's contact instead. He stood there in his driveway, the late afternoon sun baking the back of his neck, and he opened the attachment. The first few pages were the usual stuff: ancestry breakdowns, a map of migration patterns, a list of distant cousins he had never heard of. Then he got to the final confirmation page. The lab had tested 2 father samples against the son's DNA. One of them was marked with a reference number that matched the sample Joel had provided 6 months ago when Matt asked him to do the kit for Family Heritage. That result came back negative. The other reference number, the one that was flagged as the biological father, belonged to a man named Carl Vicks. Carl Vicks. Joel knew that name better than he wanted to. That was the name of the man his ex-wife Bev had married less than a year after their divorce was finalized. That was the man who now ran the big auto dealership on the edge of town, the one with the flashy commercials on the local news. That was the man Bev had left him for, the man she said understood how to build a real life. Joel had always assumed Carl came along after the marriage fell apart. He had never once considered that Carl might have been there before. His legs felt unsteady. He walked over to the porch steps and sat down heavily on the wooden boa RDS, the phone still clutched in his hand. 30 years. He had raised that boy from the age of 3. He had taught him how to throw a curveball, how to change a tire, how to stand up to bullies in the Choulier Road. He had paid for 4 years of state college tuition, had co-signed on the loan for Matt's first car, had emptied his savings account to help with the down payment on that suburban house where Matt and Caitlin now lived. And through all of it, Bev had been sitting on a secret that made every single one of those moments a lie. He looked down at the phone again and scrolled back up to Caitlin's message. Four-way wrote it to your dad's side for his records. That meant Matt had asked for this report. Matt had ordered the DNA test himself, maybe out of curiosity, maybe because someone had STA root whispering in his EAR. But Matt had not told Joel about it. Matt had not mentioned a word when Joel handed over his own cheek swab sample in that little plastic tube last winter. Matt had just said it was a fun project, a way to see where the family came from. And now Joel knew the truth. Matt was not his son. He never had been. He sat on that porch for a long time, watching the shadows of the maple trees stretch across the road. The neighbor, Greg, came out to get his mail and waved across the fence. Joel raised his hand in a limp response, not trusting his voice. Greg called out something about the weekend fishing trip they had planned, but Joel just shook his head and pointed at his phone, as if to say he was busy. Greg shrugged and went back inside. Joel was grateful for that. He did not have the words to explain what he had just found, and he was not sure he ever would. He forced himself to stand up and go inside. The house felt different now, quieter, emptier. He walked through the living room and paused at the mantelpiece, where a framed photograph sat between 2 dusty candle holders. It was a picture of him and Matt at Matt's college graduation, both of them grinning in matching navy blue gowns. Matt had his ARM draped over Joel's shoulder, and Joel remembered the pride he had felt that day, the sense that all those years of sacrifice had paid off. Now that pride curdled into something sour and heavy in his chest. He went into the study and unlocked the bottom drawer of his old oak desk. Inside was a metal box, the kind the Melita Ree had issued for personal effects back in the day. He lifted the lid and looked at the contents. His service records, his honorable Dishay RGE papers, a few medals he never wore, and a faded photograph of Bev holding a baby on their wedding day. She had been smiling in that photo, young and pretty, and little Matt had been wrapped in a white blanket with a blue trim. Joel had always thought that was the start of their family. Now he realized the baby in that photo was already 3 months old when they said their vows. He had been overseas on a deployment when Bev got pregnant. He had come home. She had been waiting with a ring and a son, and he had never questioned a single thing. He closed the box and locked it again. Then he picked up his phone and typed out a reply to Caitlin. He kept it short and neutral, 3 words that gave nothing away. Got it. Thanks. He hit send and then powered the phone off completely. He needed silence. He needed to think without the constant buzz of notifications and the weight of a conversation he was not ready to have. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stood at the window st ring out at the backyard where he had taught Matt to ride a bicycle all those years ago. The memories came in a flood, unbidden and painful. He remembered the summer Matt turned 10, when they had built a treehouse together with scrap lumber and 2 mini bent nails. He remembered driving Matt to the emergency room at midnight because of a high fever, sitting in that hot RD plastic chair for hours while the doctors ran tests. He remembered every birthday Pa Rudy, every Pa rent teacher conference, every tearful phone call when Matt got his heart broken by a girl in high school. None of that had been a waste, Joel told himself. He had chosen to be that boy's father, even if the blood did not match. But the choice had been made in ignorance, and Bev had robbed him of the chance to make it with his eyes open. He thought about Carl Vicks, the man who had been the biological father all along. Carl had been there too, in his own way. Joel remembered Matt mentioning Carl a few times over the years, always in casual asides. Mom's husband helped me get a deal on my first used car. Carl knows a guy who can get me a better interest rate. Joel had never thought much of it. He had assumed Matt was just being polite to his mother's new husband. Now he wondered how many conversations had happened behind his back, how many private father-son moments had been read at his expense. He finished the water and set the glass down hard on the counter. The sharp sound of glass against granite brought him back to the present. He had a decision to make. He could confront Bev and Carl right away. Could Ma RCH over to that dealership and throw the DNA report on their desk and demand an explanation. He could call Matt and yell at him for keeping secrets. But Joel had been a Melita re-intelligence analyst for over 2 decades before he retired. He knew better than to RG into a situation without gathering all the facts first. He needed to confirm what Matt already knew, if anything. He needed to figure out how long Bev had been lying to him. He needed to see the full scope of the deception before he decided how to respond. He turned the phone back on and scrolled through his messages. There was nothing else from Caitlin yet, but he knew it would not take her long to realize her mistake. She was not the sharpest tool in the shed, but she knew she had sent something sensitive. Joel expected a panicked call or a flood of explanatory texts within the next few hours. He would not answer. He would let her stew in her own anxiety while he took the time to think. He went back out to the porch and sat in his old rocking chair, the one with the worn armrest that fit his elbows perfectly. The sun was dipping below the roofline of the house across the street, and the sky was turning a bruised shade of orange and purple. He rocked slowly, back and forth, and let his mind run through the possibilities. Matt could be innocent in all of this, genuinely unaware that Carl Vicks was his father. Or Matt could have known for years and played along to keep the money coming. Joel thought about the monthly transfers he still made to Matt's account, the little stipend he called STA Root support, even though Matt had never STA root anything. He thought about the new pickup truck Matt had bought last spring, the one he said he financed through a dealer friend. Joel had given him $5,000 RS as a down payment gift. He thought about all the ways he had been generous, all the ways he had sacrificed his own comfort so that Matt could have a little more. He had driven a 15-year-old sedan until the transmission gave out, while Matt drove a late-model SUV. He had skipped vacations and eaten canned soup for dinner so he could send money for Matt's graduate school applications. And all along, Bev had been sitting in her big house with Carl, probably laughing about how easy it was to keep Joel on the hook that his jaw tightened. The anger was there, deep and hot, but he did not let it take over. He had been in tighter spots than this, had STA read down men with guns and men with betrayal in their eyes. He knew how to stay calm when everything inside him was screaming. He rocked a little slower and made a mental list of everything he needed to do. He needed to get a copy of his original marriage certificate. He needed to pull his bank records and track every dime he had given Matt over the years. He needed to call an old contact from his intelligence days, a man who now ran a private investigation firm. And he needed to prepare himself for the possibility that the boy he had raised was never really his, in any sense that mattered. The porch light flickered on automatically as the sky darkened. Joel looked up at the fixture and realized it had been a good 8 years since he replaced that bulb. Matt had promised to do it for him, had even brought a ladder over once, but the ladder sat in the garage for 3 months until Joel did it himself. That was how it always was. Matt made promises, and Joel kept them. That cycle was going to end. Joel did not know exactly how or when, but he knew that much for certain that he stood up slowly, his knees protesting the sudden movement. He walked back inside and locked the door behind him. Then he pulled out a notebook from the kitchen drawer and wrote writing down everything he remembered about the timeline. The date of his wedding. The date of Matt's birth. The date he deployed for that final tour. The date Bev told him she wanted a divorce. The gaps route to Ape are as he lined up the months and years. Gaps he had never noticed because he had trusted the woman he loved. He circled one particular span of time, the 9 months before Matt was born, and wrote Carl Vix's name in the margin with a question mark. He worked until his eyes burned and his handwriting grew sloppy. When he finally put down the pen, it was past midnight. He shuffled to his bedroom and lay down on the mattress, still fully clothed. He read at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles in the dark, and he let the weight of the day settle onto his chest like a stone. Tomorrow, he would start the real work. Tonight, he would allow himself the small mercy of sleep, even if the dreams that came were bound to be restless and cruel. The boy he had raised was never his, but the man he was about to become was going to be something else entirely. Joel did not sleep well. He drifted in and out of a shallow rest, his mind churning through old memories and new suspicions. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the bedroom curtains, he was already awake and staring at the ceiling. He lay there for a few minutes, letting the events of the previous day sink in again. The DNA report was real. The betrayal was real. And now he had to decide how to move forward without tipping his hand too soon. He got up and made a pot of coffee, strong and black the way he liked it. He drank the first cup standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his contacts on his phone. He stopped at Matt's name and read at it for a long moment. He wanted to call, wanted to hear Matt's voice and see if he could detect any trace of guilt or deception. But he held back. He needed more information before he confronted anyone. He needed to know exactly what Matt knew and when he had known it. He finished his coffee and went to take a shower. The hot water helped loosen the knots in his shoulders, but it did nothing for the tightness in his chest. He dressed in his usual weekend clothes, a plain flannel shirt and worn jeans, and he put the printed DNA report into the inner pocket of his jacket. Then he got in his truck and drove to the city center where Matt worked. The real estate office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building downtown. Joel parked across the street and sat in the truck for a minute, watching the entrance. He saw a few other cars pull into the lot, EARLY birds getting a jump on the weekend open houses. Then he saw Matt's silver SUV roll in and take the space closest to the door. Matt got out, phone pressed to his EAR, talking animatedly to someone on the other end. He was wearing a Shaw RP navy suit and expensive leather shoes, the kind of outfit that screamed success even if the bank account did not quite back it up. Joel waited until Matt had gone inside. Then he crossed the street and rode the creaky elevator up to the 3rd floor. The receptionist recognized him and waved him through. Matt's office was a glass-walled cube the back of the open plan space. Joel could see him through the glass, still on the phone, gesturing with one hand while he scribbled notes with the other. Joel knocked on the doorframe, and Matt looked up, his expression shifting from professional to mildly annoyed in the space of a second. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Matt covered the phone's mouthpiece with his palm. "I'm kind of in the middle of something." Joel stepped inside and took the visitor chair across from Matt's desk. "I was in the neighborhood. Just wanted to ask about that investment dividend from last month. Did it hit your account yet?" Matt's face tightened. He said a quick goodbye to whoever was on the phone and hung up. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Dad, we talked about this. That money is tied up until the end of the year. You can't just pull it out whenever you feel like it." Joel watched Matt's eyes as he spoke. He noticed the way Matt's right index finger tapped 3 times on the desk, A nervous habit Joel had seen 1,000 times over the years. Matt had done that as a kid whenever he was caught sneaking keys or lying about his homework. He was doing it now, and that told Joel more than any financial statement could. "I'm not asking to pull it out," Joel said calmly. "I'm asking if it arrived." "There's a difference." Matt blinked. Yeah, it arrived. It's in the investment account. You'll get your statement at the end of the quarter like always." Joel nodded slowly. He had not actually expected a straight answer, and he was not surprised that Matt had deflected. He changed the subject deliberately. "How's your mom doing? I haven't talked to her in a while." Matt seemed relieved by the shift. "She's good. She and Carl just got back from Yellowstone last week. They had a great time, lots of pictures of geysers and buffalo. You know how she is with her camera." Joel remembered the time he had taken Matt and Bev to Yellowstone when Matt was 5. The boy had tripped over a loose rock NEA, our old faithful, and split his knee open on a sharp edge. Joel had ride him on his back for 2 miles to the NEA Rest Ranger Station, his own legs burning with the effort, while Bev walked beside them wringing her hands and crying. He had held Matt's small hand while the nurse cleaned the wound and stitched it shut. That SCAR was still there, a pale crescent shape on Matt's right knee. "Does he still have that SCAR?" Joel asked, keeping his voice casual. "The one from Yellowstone." Matt frowned. "What SCAR? I don't remember any SCAR." Joel looked at him for a long moment. Matt was not lying, not exactly. He genuinely did not remember. But that was the point. He was 5 years old when it happened, old enough to remember a trip to a national park, old enough to remember being ride by his father. But if Joel was not his biological father, maybe the memory had faded. Maybe Matt had never really attached that moment to Joel in the same way. "It's nothing," Joel said, standing up. "Just an old memory. I'll see you at the barbecue on Sunday, right?" Matt brightened. "Yeah, sure. Caitlin's making her potato salad. You'll love it." Joel nodded and walked out of the office. He took the stairs down instead of the elevator, needing the physical exertion to burn off some of the tension. He walked to his truck and sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping the leather cover of the steering wheel. Matt had lied about the investment dividend. He had deflected the question about the SCAR. He had not once mentioned the DNA test, even though Caitlin had clearly sent that report to someone who was supposed to be on Matt's side. Either Matt was completely in the dark about what his wife had done, or he was a better actor than Joel had ever given him credit for. Joel drove to the county courthouse next. He spent an hour in the records room, requesting copies of his old marriage certificate and the original birth certificate Bev had filed for Matt. The clerk found both documents and handed them over with a bored expression. Joel took them to a quiet corner, and Compa read them side by side. The marriage certificate showed his name and Bev's, dated 3 years before the divorce. The birth certificate listed Joel as the father, with his signature in the appropriate box. But there was a small note in the margin, written by the attending physician, that gave the name of a man Joel had never seen before. It was a different name from Carl Vicks, but it was a STA routing point. He drove to the local library next and used one of their public computers to search for that physician's name. It took him some digging, but he found an old medical BOA-RD report that mentioned the doctor had been sanctioned for falsifying records in the EARLY 1990s. The timing lined up perfectly. Bev had found a doctor willing to put Joel's name on the birth certificate even though he was not the biological father. That was the kind of detail that could break a custody case wide open, if it ever went to court. His next stop was the auto dealership where Bev and Carl worked. He parked across the street and watched the showroom floor through the glass windows. He could see Bev inside, her bright red jacket and her reefily styled hair as she chatted with a young couple looking at a sedan. She moved with the same practiced ease she had always had, the same charm that had convinced Joel to marry her in the first place. Carl came out from the back office and wrapped an arm around her waist, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. Bev laughed and swatted him playfully before turning back to her customers. Joel watched them for 10 minutes, feeling nothing but a cold, hard righty. These two people had conspired to take his money, his time, his emotional investment, and they had done it without a flicker of guilt. He had been a fool to trust them, but he was not going to be a fool forever. He route the truck and drove home that evening. He made the call he had been dreading. He dialed Caitlin's number and waited through 4 rings before she picked up. Her voice was shaky, uncertain. "Hello, Caitlin," Joel said, keeping his tone flat and even. "I got your message yesterday. The DNA report. I read the whole thing." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Caitlin let out a choked sob. Oh God, Dad. I didn't mean to send that to you. I swear. I was trying to forward our idea to someone else, and I hit your name by mistake. I'm so sorry. Please don't be mad. Who were you sending it to?" Joel asked. Silence again. That doesn't matter. It was a mistake. Please, you can't tell Matt. He doesn't know I have a copy. He doesn't even know I ordered the test on his behalf." Joel felt a small pang of relief. Matt did not know. At least that part was true. But it also meant Caitlin had been poking around in her husband's private information without his consent, which raised a whole new set of questions. "Why did you order the test?" he asked. Caitlin's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I suspected. Matt has always been secretive about his family history. He never talks about his childhood. And there was this man, Carl, who kept sending him money. I saw a bank statement once. It said consulting fees, but Matt doesn't do any consulting work. I just wanted to know the truth." Joel closed his eyes. This was a mess of enormous proportions. Caitlin had her own suspicions, and she had gone behind Matt's back to confirm them. Now Joel was caught in the middle, holding information that could destroy his relationship with the boy he had raised, or at least force a reckoning that had been decades overdue. "Did Matt ever ask you to send me that report?" Joel asked. "No," Caitlin said quickly. "He doesn't even know I requested it. I did it through an online service, and I used a different email address. He's going to kill me if he finds out." Joel took a deep breath. "I'm not going to tell him. Not yet. But I need you to be honest with me from now on. If Matt says anything about the test, if he mentions any kind of family investigation, you call me immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes," Caitlin said, her voice still trembling. "Yes, I understand. Thank you, Dad. I really am sorry." Joel hung up without saying goodbye. He walked to his study and opened the metal box again, pulling out his old service records. He flipped through the pages until he found the contact information for a man named Frank Delaney, a former colleague who now ran a private investigative firm out of Chicago. He dialed the number and left a voicemail asking Frank to call him back. Then he sat down in his chair and read at the wall, his mind already spinning through the next steps. He needed to see the full scope of the deception. He needed to know how much money had changed hands between Carl and Matt over the years. He needed to know whether Bev and Carl had planned this from the very beginning or whether it had been an opportunistic cover-up after the fact. And he needed to decide, once and for all, whether the boy he had raised was worth fighting for, or whether it was time to let go of a son who was never truly his. The phone rang an hour later. It was Frank. Joel answered and explained the situation in brief, clipped sentences. Frank listened without interrupting, and when Joel finished, Frank let out a low whistle. "You got yourself a mess, old friend. But I can help. Give me a week. I'll dig up everything there is to dig." Joel agreed and hung up. He sat in the darkness of his study, the only light coming from the street lamp outside the window. He felt hollow inside, emptied of the anger and the pain and replaced with a steady, calculating calm. He had been a soldier. He had been an analyst. He had spent his life solving problems and uncovering truths. This was just another problem, another truth to uncover. And when he had all the pieces, he would decide how to play his hand. Until then, he would watch, wait, and gather. Frank Delaney did not waste any time. 3 days after Joel made that phone call, a thick manila envelope arrived in the mail, marked confidential and addressed in Frank's tight, Angole, or handwriting. Joel took it into his study and closed the door before he opened it. Inside was a comprehensive report that covered everything Frank had been able to dig up in a remarkably short period of time. That the first section detailed Carl Vix's professional history. Carl had worked as a regional sales representative for a medical supply company in the URS before Joel and Bev got married. That company had been a client of the firm where Bev worked as an administrative assistant. Frank had found old expense reports showing that Carl had made regular visits to Bev's office during the period when Joel was overseas on deployment. The timing was precise. Carl's visits route about 4 months before Joel returned home, and they continued through the month after Joel's wedding. Joel set that page aside and moved to the next section. Frank had pulled financial records that showed a pattern of payments from CARL to Bev that predated the divorce. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always labeled as consulting fees or professional services. Bev had been receiving money from CARL while she was still married to Joel. She had been building a safety net with her lover's money, all while Joel was sending his Melita paychecks home to support their household. The third section was the most damning. Frank had obtained a copy of Matt's birth certificate from the state archives, the original version that had been filed before any amendments were made. That version listed the father as unknown, with no name in the paternal slot. There was a note in the margins from the attending physician, the same one Joel had seen at the courthouse, indicating that the mother had declined to identify the father at the time of birth. The amended version, the one Joel had signed years later, was a forgery. Bev had presented it to him when Matt was already 3 years old, claiming that the hospital had lost the original and needed a new signature. Joel had signed it without a second thought. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. The evidence was overwhelming. Bev had not only lied to him for 30 years. She had actively constructed a web of paperwork and false narratives to keep him in the dark. And Matt had benefited from every single one of those lies, whether he knew it or not. That Frank had included one more item, a CPA rate report that focused on Matt's finances. It showed that Matt had been receiving monthly deposits from a shell company that Frank traced back to CARL Vix's dealership network. The deposits had stayed root the year Matt turned 22 and had continued without interruption ever since. They amounted to nearly $80,000 RS over the course of a decade. Matt had never mentioned any of that money to Joel. He had always come to Joel when he needed cash, always had a story about a business opportunity or a sudden expense. Joel had given freely, thinking he was helping his son build a future. In reality, he had been supplementing the income Matt was already receiving from his biological father. Joel closed the report and placed it back in the envelope. He walked over to the window and looked out at his backyard, the same yard where he had taught Matt to throw a baseball and ride a bike. The memories that had once brought him such joy now felt like a betrayal. Every catch, every game, every late-night conversation had been built on a foundation of lies. Matt might not have known the full truth about his parentage, but he had certainly known that CARL was sending him money. He had chosen to keep that a secret. He had chosen to let Joel keep paying for his life while he collected checks from another man. That was the party that hurt the most. Joel could almost forgive Bev's deception, twisted as it was. She was a young woman who had made a desperate choice, and she had doubled down on it for 3 decades out of fear or convenience. But Matt was a grown man. He had opportunities to come clean, to ask questions, to investigate his own origins. He had chosen not to. He had chosen the easy path, the one that kept Joel's money flowing and his conscience clear. Over the next few days, Joel began to gather his own records. He pulled out every check he had ever written to Matt, every bank transfer, every credit card payment he had made on Matt's behalf. He stacked them in chronological order on his dining room table and adding them up. The total was staggering. College tuition, wedding expenses, CA or down payments, house repairs, business investments that never seemed to produce returns, cash gifts for birthdays and holidays. It came to $173,000 RS over 3 decades. That was money he could have used for his own retirement, his own comfort, his own dreams. He had given it freely because he believed in his son, and his son had taken it without a hint of gratitude. He also revisited his old correspondence with Matt. He dug through shoeboxes filled with birthday cards, Father's Day notes, and occasional letters from Matt's college years. The words were warm and loving on the surface, but Joel root to notice patterns he had missed before. Matt asked about Joel's life, his health, his interests. The letters were almost entirely about Matt's own needs and achievements. They were the communications of a man who saw his father as a resource rather than a person. One afternoon, while he was sorting through a box of old photos, Joel found a picture that stopped him cold. It was from Matt's high school graduation, a group shot of the entire family. Bev was there, beaming in a floral dress. CARL was there too, standing slightly behind Bev with his hand on her shoulder. Joel was on the other side of Matt, his hand resting on the boy's arm. The strange thing was the way Matt leaned. His shoulders were tilted Tawa RDCARL, his head angled slightly away from Joel. It was a subtle thing, almost invisible at a glance. But once Joel saw it, he could not unsee it. Matt had been pulling away from him for years, and Joel had been too blind to notice. He put the photo in a separate folder with the other evidence. Then he called Frank again and asked for two more things. First, a copy of Carl's original divorce papers from his first marriage to see if there were any other patterns of deception. Second, a private investigator's report on Matt's current financial situation, including any hidden accounts or assets he might not have disclosed. Frank promised to get back to him within a week. In the meantime, Joel sta route making small changes to his routine. He stopped answering Matt's calls immediately, letting them go to voicemail, and calling back hours later with a vague excuse about being busy. He stopped attending the weekly dinners at Matt's house, citing a sore back or a prior engagement. He stopped offering money when Matt hinted at financial troubles. Each small withdrawal was a step Tawa RD disentangling himself from a relationship that was built on sand. The Haridist Pa RT was maintaining his composure in public. He still went to the Veterans Association meetings, still played CARDS at the community center, still waved to Greg over the fence. He smiled and joked and acted like his life was unchanged. But every conversation felt like an act. Every laugh cost him something. He was playing a role, waiting for the moment when he could drop the mask and show everyone the truth. Bev called him one evening, her voice dripping with false cheerfulness. "Joel, I hear you haven't been coming to family dinners. Is everything okay? You know you're always welcome." He kept his tone light. "Everything's fine, Bev. Just been busy with some projects around the house. I'll come by when I have time." She paused, and he could almost hear her trying to decide whether to press further. "Well, if you need anything, you let me know. You're still Pa RT of this family, even if things got complicated." "Of course," Joel said, and he meant it in a way she would never understand. He was still Pa RT of the family, but the family was about to Leah Arin what he was made of. He hung up and went back to his study. The evidence was piling up, each document a brick in a wall that would eventually come crashing down. He had not decided yet how to deliver the blow. He could do it publicly, at the next family gathering, with copies of every piece of evidence spread across the table. He could do it privately, in a closed meeting with Bev and Carl and Matt, giving them a chance to explain themselves before he walked away. He could take it to a lawyer and let the courts handle the financial restitution. What he knew for certain was that he was not going to let them get away with it. He had spent 30 years being the dependable one, the steady source of love and money and emotional support. He had been taken for granted, used, and disc-ride whenever it suited them. That was going to end. And when it ended, they were going to realize just how much they had lost. He pulled out a blank notebook and sta route making a list. Names, dates, amounts, witnesses. Every piece of information went into the book, organized by category and cross-referenced with the documents in his files. He wrote with the same methodical precision he had used in his intelligence days, laying out the facts in a way that left no room for doubt. When he finished, he closed the notebook and put it in the metal box with the rest of his evidence. Then he went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of whiskey, the first drink he had taken in months. He held it up to the light and watched the amber liquid catch the glow from the window. "You made a fool of me," he said aloud, speaking to no one in particular, "but I'm not a fool. That's the thing you never understood." He drank the whiskey in one long swallow and felt the RMTH spread through his chest. The anger was still there, but it had settled into something colder and more determined. He was done being the victim. He was done being the silent provider. He was ready to take back his life, and he was going to do it on his own terms. The next morning, he received a call from Matt. This time, Joel answered. "Hey, Dad," Matt said, his voice bright and casual. "Listen, I was wondering if you could lend me a little cash. Just a temporary thing. I've got a big deal coming together, and I need some bridge money to cover the closing costs." Joel smiled grimly. "How much?" "Just a couple thousand. Nothing major. I'll pay you back in a few weeks." Joel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Matt, I need to ask you something first. Have you ever received money from Carl, any payments that I don't know about?" The silence on the other end was deafening. When Matt finally spoke, his voice was defensive. "Why are you asking me about Carl? What does he have to do with anything?" Just answer the question. Joel said calmly. Matt paused again, and Joel could almost hear him trying to come up with a plausible denial. I mean, he sent me a few things over the IRS. Birthday money, stuff like that. Nothing important. Nothing important, Joel repeated. Okay, thank you for being honest. He hung up before Matt could say another word. He did not need to hear the rest of the lies. He had the answers he needed. The boy he had raised was never his son, and the man he had become was someone Joel no longer recognized. The only thing left to do was to finish the job and walk away clean. He picked up his notebook and added one more line under Matt's name. He knew about the money. He lied about the source. Then he closed the book and set it aside. He was almost ready. Thanksgiving arrived with a gray sky and a biting wind that rattled the BA branches of the oak trees along Joel Street. He had received the invitation 3 weeks earlier, a fully worded email from Bev that made it sound like a gracious gesture rather than a desperate attempt to keep up appearances. We'd love to have you for dinner, Joel. It wouldn't be Thanksgiving without you. He had read that line twice, marveling at her audacity. She had spent 30 years lying to him, and she still expected him to show up and play the part of the grateful old grandfather. He had accepted the invitation without hesitation. He had known this day would come, and he had read for it with the same meticulous he had once applied to intelligence briefings. The evidence was organized, the documents were copied, and his resolve was iron. He dressed fully that morning, not in his usual flannel shirt, but in a clean-pressed button-down, a decent pair of trousers, and his best leather jacket. He wanted to look respectable. He wanted them to see that he was not broken, not defeated, not the sad old man they had always assumed he was. The dinner was held at the dealership's back event space, a large room that Bev and Carl used for client appreciation parties. When Joel walked in, the place was already buzzing with activity. A long table had been set up in the center of the room, covered with a white cloth and laden with platters of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and all the traditional trimmings. Bev was at the head of the table, wearing a festive orange sweater and a smile that looked painted on. Carl stood beside her, his arm draped over the back of her chair in a possessive gesture that Joel had seen 100 times before. Matt was there too, seated in the middle of the table with Caitlin beside him. Matt looked up when Joel entered, and his face flickered through a series of expressions that Joel read with cold celerity. First came relief, as if Matt had been afraid Joel might not show up. Then came a flash of guilt, quickly suppressed. Then the practiced smile that Matt wore like a mask. He stood up and walked over to Joel, extending his hand. Dad, glad you made it. Joel took the hand and shook it firmly. Wouldn't miss it. His voice was steady, his face neutral. He let Matt guide him to a seat at the end of the table, away from the main cluster of family. That was fine with Joel. He wanted a clear view of everyone, and he wanted them all to see him. The other guests filtered in over the next few minutes. Carl's 2 adult children from his first marriage arrived with their spouses and a pack of noisy grandchildren. They filled the remaining seats, laughing and chatting about football scores and holiday travel plans. Joel recognized some of them from previous gatherings, but he had never felt connected to them. They were Carl's people, not his. He had always been the outsider at these events, the quiet presence who slipped in and out without making much of an impression. Today, he intended to be unforgettable. Bev made a show of greeting him, air-kissing both cheeks and patting his shoulder like he was a beloved uncle. Joel, you look well. Have you been eating properly? She asked the question with a motherly concern that made his stomach turn. I've been taking care of myself, he said, meeting her eyes. Better than I used to, anyway. She blinked, and for a moment he saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. Then the mask was back in place. Well, good. That's good. Now, you let me fix you a plate. I made the stuffing just the way you like it. He let her fuss over him, accepting the plate she loaded with food. He even took a few bites, chewing slowly and swallowing without tasting anything. His appetite had vanished the moment he walked through the door, replaced by a cold, watchful anticipation. The conversation at the table swirled around him, trivial and bright. Carl made a joke about the local football team, and everyone laughed. Matt told a story about a difficult client, and Caitlin rolled her eyes in a way that suggested she had heard it before. Joel observed it all like a man watching a play from the back of the theater. The moment came when the plates were mostly empty and the dessert course was being served. Carl was in the middle of a story about a deal he had closed the previous week, gesturing with his fork and basking in the attention. Joel set down his fork and Clea read his throat. It was a small sound, but it cut through the chatter like a knife. Everyone turned to look at him. I have something I want to share, Joel said, his voice calm and Clea, something that came to my attention a few weeks ago. The room went quiet. Matt's face lost its color. Caitlin sta read at her plate. Bev's smile froze in place, and Carl's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. I received a DNA test result, Joel continued. It was sent to me by mistake, but I read it. The report showed that Matt is not my biological son. His father is someone else entirely. He paused and let the words sink in. That man is Carl Vix. A collective gasp rippled around the table. Carl's daughter from his first mariage dropped her napkin. Her husband muttered something under his breath. The grandchildren, too young to understand, kept eating their pumpkin pie, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Bev was the first to recover. Joel, this is not the time or place. We can talk about this privately. Her voice was sharp, commanding, the voice she used when she was trying to control a situation that was spiraling out of her grasp. I think this is exactly the time and place, Joel replied evenly. You've had 30 years to be private about this. 30 years of lying to me, taking my money, and letting me raise a child who was never mine. I think the family deserves to know the truth, don't you? Matt stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Dad, please. Can we just not do this here? He was looking at Joel with an expression that was half desperation and half anger. This is YMBA racing. YMBA racing, Joel repeated, and he felt the cold satisfaction of finally speaking the words he had held inside for weeks. You want to talk about YMBA racing? How about the time you came to me for a down payment on your house, and I gave you $15,000 RS out of my retirement savings? How about the time you said you needed help with your business, and I handed over another 10? Do you know how much I've given you over the RS? Matt, $173,000 RS. I have every single transaction documented. And all that time, you were receiving money from Carl too. Monthly deposits, marked as consulting fees. Do you want to explain that? Matt opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face was a blotchy red, and his hands were trembling at his sides. Carl finally spoke up, his voice oily and defensive. Now, Joel, let's not get right away. Yes, there was a situation back then. Bev and I were young, and we made a mistake. But you raised Matt. You were his father in every way that mattered. Doesn't that count for something? Joel turned to look at Carl, and for the first time in 30 years, he let the full weight of his contempt show in his eyes. You don't get to tell me what counts. You don't get to stand there and pretend you did me a favor. You let me raise your son, and you watched me pay for his life while you sat back and laughed. Both of you. He looked at Bev now, and her mask had finally slipped. She was pale and trembling, her fully constructed composure crumbling around her. You took everything from me. My money, my time, my love, and you never gave me a single honest moment in return. Caitlin was crying now, muffling her sobs with her hands. The grandchildren had been shushed and sent to a corner of the room to play with their phones. Carl's daughter was whispering furiously to her husband, her eyes wide with shock. The room felt smaller, hotter, the air thick with tension. Joel reached into his jacket and pulled out the folder he had read. He set it on the table in front of him. Inside this folder is everything. The DNA report, the bank statements, the forged birth certificate, the payment Carl made to Matt over the IRS. I have copies of all of it, and I've already sent a set to my lawyer. He let that sink in. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not threatening anyone. I just want you all to know that I know. And I am done. He stood up slowly, his legs steady beneath him. He looked at Matt one last time, at the man he had raised and loved and trusted. You were never my son, he said, his voice flat. Not in the way I thought. And I was never your father. Not in any way that you respected. Matt made a sound, something between a sob and a protest. Dad, please. Give me a chance to explain. I didn't know. Not at first. Not until a few years ago, when I sta root asking questions. And then I didn't know how to tell you. I was SCA red. SCA red of losing my money, Joel asked. Or SCA red of losing my respect? Matt had no answer for that. Joel walked toward the door. He did not rush, did not stumble. He moved with the measured pace of a man who had said his piece and had nothing left to prove. Behind him, Bev's voice rising in protest, Carl's heavy footsteps as he tried to follow, Caitlin's broken sobs, and Matt's desperate pleading. None of it touched him. He had already said everything that needed to be said. He stepped outside into the cold November air and took a deep breath. The Power King lot was empty, the street quiet. He walked to his truck and unlocked the door, but he did not get in right away. He leaned against the hood and looked up at the sky, gray and heavy with the promise of snow. His heart was pounding, but the sharp edge of pain he had expected did not come. Instead, he felt a strange, hollow peace. He had laid down the burden. He had ride for 30 years. He had told the truth, and the truth had set him free. He got into the truck and root the engine. The heater blew warm air across his face as he pulled out of the Power King lot and headed home. He did not look back. There was nothing behind him that he wanted to see. Ahead of him was a future that belonged only to him. And for the first time in a very long time, that future looked like something worth living for. At the weeks after Thanksgiving passed in a blur of quiet change. Joel did not call anyone, and for a long while, no one called him. He imagined the chaos that must have erupted after he left that event space, the accusations and TRS and frantic damage control. But he did not to know the details. He had said his piece, and the rest was not his problem. He went back to his routine with a sense of relief that surprised him. He woke early, made coffee, and sat on his porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He walked to the community center for his bridge games and sang with the veterans choir on Wednesday nights. He even root going to the gym, something he had not done in years, because he liked the way it made his body feel strong and capable. The first sign that word had spread came from Greg, his neighbor. Greg stopped by one afternoon with a six-pack of beer and a hesitant expression. "Hey, Joel, I hear some things. I don't want to pry, but if you need to talk, I'm here." Joel took the beer and gestured for Greg to sit. "I appreciate that. I'm doing all right, though. Better than I have in a long time." Greg nodded, looking relieved. "Good. That's good. You know, my wife's cousin went through something similar. Her ex-husband turned out to have a whole other family. It took her a while, but she came out stronger on the other side." Joel smiled. "I believe that. It's amazing what happens when you stop lying dead weight." They drank their beers and talked about fishing and the weather and the upcoming holiday lights display in the town square. It was the kind of easy conversation Joel had not realized he had been missing. He had spent so many years focused on Matt and Matt's needs that he had let his other friendships wither. Now he was watering them again, and they were coming back to life. A few days later, he received a letter from Bev. It was handwritten on expensive stationery, and the words were fully chosen. She apologized for the deception, said she had been young and afraid and had made terrible choices. She asked if there was any way they could find a path forward, if not as a family, then at least as people who had once read for each other. Joel read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in his desk drawer. He did not respond. There was nothing she could say that would undo the damage, and he had no interest in hearing her excuses. Carl sent a message through a mutual acquaintance, offering to repay some of the money Joel had spent on Matt. The offer was vague and conditional, wrapped in legal jargon that suggested Carl was trying to protect himself. Joel passed the message to his lawyer and let him handle it. He did not need the money, but he wanted Carl to know that he was not going to simply walk away and let them off the hook. There would be consequences, even if they were not the dramatic kind Joel might have imagined in his angrier moments. Matt tried to reach him multiple times. He left voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations to desperate pleas for another chance. He sent texts and emails, each one more frantic than the last. Joel listened to the voicemails and read the messages, but he did not reply. He had said everything he needed to say at that Thanksgiving table. Matt's remorse, whether genuine or performative, did not change the fundamental truth. He had lied by omission for years, and he had taken advantage of Joel's love without ever truly returning it. Caitlin also reached out, but her message was different. She sent a short email that simply said, "I'm sorry for my pa RT in this. I know I made things worse. I hope you find happiness." Joel appreciated the honesty, even if he did not feel moved to respond. Caitlin had been a pawn in a La Ridger game, and he held no particular or grudge against her. But he had closed that chapter of his life, and he was not interested in reopening it. Yet by the time winter set in, Joel had made several significant decisions. He listed his house for sale, not because he needed the money, but because he wanted a fresh start. The place held too many memories, too many ghosts of the life he had thought he was living. He found a smaller property on the edge of a Nearby lake, a cozy 2-bedroom cottage with a screened porch and a wooden dock. It was modest and unpretentious, exactly what he needed. He moved in just before Christmas. The cottage was spa-sly furnished at first, just his bed, his favorite Aram chair, and a few boxes of books and keepsakes. He hung his medals on a small shelf above the fireplace, not as a show of pride, but as a reminder of who he had been before he became someone else's prop. He looked at them each morning and felt a quiet sense of continuity. He had served his country with honor, and that was something no one could take from him. But the first snowfall came on Christmas Eve. Joel sat on his porch with a cup of hot cocoa, watching the flakes drift down and blanket the frozen lake. The world was silent and still, wrapped in the peace of a winter night. He thought about all the Christmases he had spent with Matt, the presents he had wrapped, the meals he had cooked, the traditions he had tried to build. Some of those memories still brought a pang of sadness, but the sadness was muted now, softened by time and distance. He heard a car pull into the driveway and looked up to see Greg's truck. Greg got out, carrying a covered dish and a bottle of wine. "My wife made too much lasagna," he said with a grin. "Thought you might want some company." Joel smiled and waved him up onto the porch. They ate lasagna and drank wine and talked late into the night. Greg told stories about his own family, his grown children and their children, the joys and frustrations of being a father and grandfather. Joel listened and realized that he did not feel envious. He had been a father too, even if it had all been based on a lie. The love he had given Matt had been real, even if the circumstances had not been. And that love had made him who he was today. After Greg left, Joel sat alone in the quiet cottage and reflected on everything that had happened. He had lost a son, but he had found himself. He had been betrayed by people he trusted, but he had also discovered a strength he had not known he possessed. The anger was gone, replaced by a calm acceptance. He had done what he could, and now he was moving forward. A road the new year brought new opportunities. Joel root volunteering at a local nonprofit that helped elderly veterans navigate the bureaucracy of pensions and healthcare. He found that he had a gift for cutting through red tape, a skill honed by decades of intelligence work. The other volunteers appreciated his no-nonsense approach, and the veterans he helped were grateful for his patience and expertise. It gave him a sense of purpose that he had been lacking for years. He also root seeing more of a woman named Diane, a retired nurse he had met at the Veterans Choir. She was widowed, witted, and utterly unimpressed by any attempt at pretense. They went on walks along the lake, read meals at a local diner, and talked about books and travel and the absurdities of aging. Diane had a laugh that filled a room and a way of looking at Joel that made him feel seen, truly seen, in a way he had not felt in decades. That one evening in early spring, they were sitting on his dock, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and red. Diane turned to him and asked, "Do you ever regret it? Raising that boy, I mean, knowing what you know now?" Joel thought about the question for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. I loved him, and I did my best. That's all any of us can do. The fact that it turned out to be based on a lie doesn't change the love I felt. And it doesn't change the fact that I'm a better man for having tried." Diane nodded slowly. "That's a beautiful way to put it. It took me a while to get there," Joel admitted. "There were days when I was so angry I couldn't see straight. But anger is a heavy thing to carry, and I've ride enough heavy things in my life." She reached over and took his hand. "Well, you don't have to carry anything alone anymore. Not if you don't want to." He looked at her, at the kindness in her eyes and the warmth in her smile. He squeezed her hand and felt something shift inside him, a door opening to a future he had not dared to imagine. The past was behind him, and the future was wide open. A few weeks later, Joel hosted a small barbecue at his cottage. He invited Greg and his wife, a few of the veterans from the choir, and a handful of his new friends from the nonprofit. Diane was there, of course, helping him flip burgers and keep the potato salad chilled. The afternoon was warm and sunny, the lake sparkling in the distance. As the sun began to set, Joel stood up and raised his glass. "I want to thank all of you for being here," he said. "I spent a lot of years giving everything to people who didn't appreciate it. But I've learned something important. The people who matter are the ones who show up, the ones who see you for who you are and stick around anyway. That's what I have now. That's what I'm grateful for." His friends cheered and clinked their glasses. Diane slipped her arm around his waist and leaned her head against his shoulder. Joel looked out at the lake, at the calm water and the fading light, and he felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. He had lost a family, but he had built another one, piece by piece, honest conversation by honest conversation. The life he had now was not the life he had planned, but it was real and it was his. And that was more than enough. For anyone out there who has been through something similar or who has been lied to and taken advantage of and made to feel small, Joel wanted to say this. Your worth does not depend on what others think of you. Your value is not measured by how much you give to people who do not give back. You can start over at any age. You can build a life that truly belongs to you. It takes courage and it takes time, but it is possible. Joel Harris was living proof of that. He had walked through fire and come out the other side. And he was ready for whatever came next, not because he had all the answers, but because he finally knew who he was. He raised his glass one last time and smiled at the people gathered around him. "Here's to second chances," he said, "and to knowing when to let go." Everyone drank to that. The stars came out one by one, and the night air filled with laughter and the smell of summer grass. Joel set down his glass and leaned back in his chair, feeling lighter than he had in years. The story of his life was still being written, and he was finally holding the pen. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you have been through yourself, please consider subscribing for more. There are plenty of hard-headed old guys out there with stories worth telling, and we have got plenty more to share. Life is tough, but so are we. Thanks for reading, and we will see you in the next one.